speaking of world-changing Muhammad Ali, I think probably for many people in this audience, I know certainly for me, I was not alive when he was Cassius Clay. I was not alive when he was boxing, I don't think. And I knew aspects of this story, and I knew aspects of his fighting days. I'm also presented with a very different image today of Muhammad Ali. You begin the film with showing him receiving the Medal of Freedom from George W. Bush, something that would obviously be inconceivable back in the 60s, because Bush was high on crack.
I think they have one thing in common. Neither of them went and fought in the Vietnam War. That's about it.
So I imagine part of the goal of the film, maybe the whole goal, was to say, look it, this guy you see now, there is a lot more to him. There was a lot more to him. Is that accurate?
Well, and I think that a lot of people, depending on what corner of the ring you stand in, and I guess maybe when you were born, that's true. I think to this day you could walk into most any third grade classroom in the country, maybe the world, and say, raise your hand if you know who Muhammad Ali is, and 80-90% of the hands would go in the air. Still to this day, on name recognition value alone, people know who he is. And then if you follow up and ask, so who is he? You won't get the story that's in the film. He's a boxer, or he has Parkinson's, or he's that old guy that had the torch at the Olympics.
Sure.
And so there's a shorthand familiarity with him, and yet he's still immensely recognizable. And I felt like despite the bookshelf that would buckle under the weight of material that is out there about Ali, and documentary films that have been made about him, that there was still an important film to be made about his years outside the ring.
Well, you had been a researcher on a previous documentary, or a 6-part documentary of Muhammad Ali. What was it about him in particular that had stuck with you all those years? Or what were you introduced then that wasn't in that film that you said, I need to show that now?
This story. So, I grew up in Minnesota, and I have so many. I'm a Vikings fan. Can we just get that out? Actually, I'm not a Vikings fan. My dad and I founded Vikings Anonymous. It's our 12-step program for long-suffering, Super Bowl losing Vikings fans. But Rich Cohen said something earlier about Mike Ditka in New Orleans, Palm Tree in Minnesota, and it triggered. I'll come back to your question
Sure,
in a
yeah,
second,
absolutely.
But it triggered something that I hadn't thought about in a long time, which was watching an old newscast in Minneapolis, growing up with my folks, and there was all of a sudden palm trees started to appear in Princeton, Minnesota, this tiny town, and which we went through every time we went to our lake cabin, which we have to this day. My dad died a few years ago, but we still have the cabin anyway. And my dad was like, well, palm trees in Minnesota, how is this possible? This is not right. And it turned out that this drug dealer had completely snowed, pun intended, I think, the town of Princeton, and by bringing in palm trees and beautifying the town so he could run his drugs through small town Minnesota. So
wait a
you
minute.
can plant a palm tree in Minnesota. You'll just go to prison if you try.
Well, that's incredible. Why aren't there palm trees everywhere?
I think when he got caught, ultimately,
that was the end of palm trees in the upper Midwest.
Yeah.
Okay,
all
right.
I know. So anyway,
boxing, Muhammad Ali, trials of
discovering the story. So my first gig in documentary 23 years ago was on this obscenely $6 million well-funded series called Muhammad Ali: The Whole Story in New York, and for one, I thought, man, if this is documentary film, they have this incredible suite in Soho and all these hotshot New York filmmakers directing segments and $6 million of Japanese publishing house money. It was crazy.
And you were like, I want in on this.
Yeah, this is what I want to do. And my job as a researcher was go get them. Here's a huge room full of archival footage and all these books, and just help us put the story together. And so as I was doing that, I found myself, I had kind of that third grader knowledge of who Muhammad Ali was at the time. And I discovered this Ali beyond the ring making these speeches on college campuses against the Vietnam War and against racism, representing himself as the minister in the Nation of Islam. And I knew a bit about, sort of autobiography of Malcolm X level understanding of who the Nation of Islam was. But I did not know this Muhammad Ali, and I thought, man, this is its own film. And it just stayed with me, and I could tell that these guys were out to make yet another kind of boxing highlight film. And they spent all $6 million in a year, and the film didn't get made, which is its own reality television show. I call it Blow This Money.
Wow.
You know, here's $6 million. You have a year to spend it.
That's horrible.
Can you do it?
Yeah.
You know, I don't know if I could. So anyway, I came back to Chicago, and that's when I first hooked up with Kartemquin Films, who was in the late stages of completing Hoop Dreams, which is a legendary film. Steve.
Yeah.
Right on, man.
And you were a researcher on that film, correct?
I was researcher because Kartemquin's so generous with credits, because it doesn't cost you anything to give people credit.
Sure.
I had really nothing to do with that film.
Yeah.
But I took the credit.
Yeah, that's
And
great.
it's
I'd love a
still-
credit on their next
Yeah,
film.
hell yeah, why not? But that's really where I learned what documentary film is. You know, this collective, grassroots, day in, day out, no money to this day. Don't get into documentary film to make money, no money. But, you know, labor of love, immense, incredible series. And so then I went on and did other stuff, but that stayed with me. And I thought, man, someday I'm going to make, hopefully, a film about Muhammad Ali, the exile years. And that's really where it started.
So briefly, and I don't want to give away the whole film, obviously, but talk about the beginnings of the story. Cassius Clay grows up in Kentucky, becomes the heavyweight champion. How soon after that did this transformation take place?
So he won the Olympic gold medal in 1960 as Cassius Clay, obviously, as 18, I think he was at the time. Came back to Louisville. He was backed by this group of kind of out of central casting Louisville millionaires, you know, bourbon, tobacco, manufacturing, media, who were used to getting their way and thought, well, they were gentlemen sportsmen. And they actually treated Cassius Clay fairly in terms of they modeled the contract at that point. They'd never done anything like this. They just thought, we got this guy, let's, you know, like the Kentucky Derby, let's see if he can win,
Sure.
sort of thing. And lo and behold, he did, but as he's becoming heavyweight champion of the world, unbeknownst to them largely, he's also discovering the Nation of Islam and having his eyes open to a race-oriented worldview in segregated Louisville and via Chicago, because this is where he boxed in the Golden Gloves, that was blowing his mind and helping him identify who he was on a you know, coming of age level, both from a race and faith and identity perspective. And so that process took, you know, I don't even know if Ali could tell you exactly when he first discovered the Nation of Islam, but sometime between the late 50s when he came here to box in the Golden Gloves, and certainly by 62 when he was in Miami training, he knew about him. And one of the people that's interviewed in the film is this guy, Captain Sam, who met Ali, then Cassius Clay, on a street corner, and recognized they called themselves, or they said they were fishing. You know, that's how Nation of Islam people would recruit people in. You know, you'd go out on the street corner, Mohammed speaks, and Cassius Clay was there, and he obviously already knew about who they were. And that's how that began. And so it was roughly a 4 or 5 year period. And when that heavyweight title fight happened, the sponsoring group had no idea really that their mind was about to be completely blown by a young kid who they thought they knew who he was and they were riding him, and little did they know that he was going to turn the world upside down.
So he converts, he becomes Muhammad Ali. How quickly did mainstream America, white America, turn on him? Or were there major pockets who stuck with him and still loved him?
Both. In a way, I think that mainstream white America was starting to turn on him when he was still Cassius Clay.
Okay.
You know, there's a clip in the film where, you know, he was the Louisville Lip, and he would call the round, and he was already brash and completely confident and defiant, even as Cassius Clay. There's a clip in the film where the newscaster's saying, I want to see you keep your mouth shut for 30 seconds. Can you do it? And you would think if you're interviewing someone, you
Yeah.
want them to talk.
It'd be a
right?
weird thing to say,
Yeah,
and a self-defeating one as well.
That would be a weird thing
Yeah.
to say. And so, but in a way, the subtext is behave. You are not being the rising contender that we white American in control folks are used to having. So slow down, kid. And no way, I think it just accelerated him. So then when he joins the Nation of Islam, the shitstorm begins and changes his name. Now he's heavyweight champion of the world. And your name is what? And they refuse to acknowledge
The New York Times wouldn't do
until
it.
the 70s.
Yeah,
Wouldn't print Muhammad Ali, or at least without AKA.
yeah.
And but at the same time, there were Robert Lipsyte, who's in the film, Howard Cosell, who were champions of him in the beginning. And then I think more importantly, in the black community here, he was recognized early on as an emerging Jackie Robinson opened the door. I've heard people say Muhammad Ali broke the wall down.
And you've got a clip though of Jackie Robinson not being fond of what Muhammad.
Complicated.
Yeah.
It's generational in that respect. And Ali, when he became Ali, would call Joe Louis and Uncle Tom, which was tremendously devastating to a generation of black folks who grew up with Joe Louis as their hero and still rooting for Muhammad Ali at the same time. So yeah, it was a painful and yet exciting, I think, moment where the whole I kind of think of that period in a lot of ways as our national adolescence. We're still a relatively young country.
Sure.
In the grand scheme of things,
Compared
right?
to China.
Compared to China, exactly. And so all that ferment and defiance and pissing off our elders and disrespecting our elders righteously, sometimes necessarily, but in misguided ways. I co-directed the Weather Underground film. It's kind of in there too, in another strain, is something that that I think is part of becoming who we are. And I still think we're sort of relatively young adults trying to figure that out collectively. I don't think we're there yet.
You mentioned Robert Lipsyte, and he's got a line in the film which I'm not going to get completely right, but it's something to the effect of, we all look at Muhammad Ali through our own lens. The movie, you could look at the movie. Did you look at the movie that way? Like, we're all going to look at him. The way we perceive Muhammad Ali says a lot about what we think about the world.
Yeah, ultimately, I hope if the film's doing its job, it's at least as much about us as it is about him, in the sense that once he became fully formed Muhammad Ali and refused to go to Vietnam, which is a whole another layer of defiance, right? It's one thing to join the Nation of Islam and be heavyweight champion and embrace Islam, and then another thing to refuse to go to war at a time when the government's mandating that you do it. And so at that point, I think it was on us to respond, and the response initially was ugly. Convict him of draft evasion, sentence him 5 years of prison, fine him $10,000, take his passport away. No, you're not heavyweight champion anymore. Take the belt away, deny him a right to box. Unbelievable. You can't even fathom any of it now. But, as you noted, the film opens with the scene of George Bush giving the Presidential Medal of Freedom. That's not because Muhammad Ali transformed, that's because we did. Although, that said, I don't know that.
But he did transform. I mean,
he did. I also don't know that President Bush even understood who he was putting the medal in. So I don't want to give Bush credit for transforming. I'm not sure that that's the case.
But, I mean, at some point, Ali left the Nation of Islam. I think he became a Sunni and then eventually
Sufi,
more spiritual.
Yeah.
So he did change.
Yeah, true. But he didn't apologize. He never took it back. He never said, I should have gone to Vietnam. One of the things, now looking back, it's generally accepted the Vietnam War was wrong. It was a wrong military adventure on so many levels for us to be involved in. But then when Ali first refused, that was not popular wisdom.
It was early.
It was early, and therefore he became a villain in many quarters. But at the same time, I think he was inspiring young people of draft age to reconsider their options.
How is he, though? You talk about the Weather Underground, you made a film. How is he so beloved now? How did that happen? Because you can think of other 60s radicals, certainly other black power radicals, who the mainstream America, or certainly the right of America, and even the left of America, look back and say, hey, you guys, we weren't with that program. But Muhammad Ali, again, if you talk to third graders, nobody's going to say, and my dad doesn't like that guy. Like
They might actually. No,
think?
seriously. Yeah, I think they're minority, but now, thank God. But at the same time, I think one of the things he always had going for him was his athletic prowess. In the ring, he was heavyweight champion when he was put into exile, and he came back and reclaimed the title. And by the time that happened, so much had changed in the country, that so much had transformed in all of, in popular wisdom. The tide had turned against the Vietnam War. The civil rights movement had really broken, the black freedom struggle had really broken through. People understood the heinous acts that our government is capable of. There's a period in the mid-late 70s when COINTELPRO's bursting out in the open, the government's being called out on the carpet on Watergate, so many different fronts. And so liking Ali was much easier at that point. And he won. He kicked ass. He's the greatest, right, in the ring of all time. I mean, how can you not, by the time he's fighting George Foreman in Zaire, how could you not root for him?